By 1882, British soldiers were marching through Cairo. British officers were issuing orders from Egyptian ministries. British warships controlled Egypt's coastline. Officially, Egypt still belonged to the Ottoman Empire, and it still had its own ruler. In reality, the country had lost control of its finances, its military decisions, and its political future. Britain insisted this was not colonization, only a temporary occupation meant to restore stability. But the occupation would last more than 70 years. What made Egypt's case unusual was not the outcome, but the method. Britain had not conquered Egypt through a long war of expansion. There had been no drawn-out invasion, no decades of fighting. Instead, Egypt had been pulled under British control through debt, financial supervision, and a series of decisions that gradually stripped the state of its sovereignty. By the time British troops arrived, Egypt's independence had already been hollowed out. To understand how this happened, it is necessary to look backward, not to a battlefield, but to a ledger. In the middle of the 19th century, Egypt occupied a unique position in global politics. It was formerly part of the Ottoman Empire, but it functioned with near independence. Its ruler, known as the Khedive, governed with wide autonomy. Egypt controlled one of the most strategic territories in the world, sitting between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, linking Europe to Asia and Africa. As global trade expanded, Egypt's importance only increased. Europe, meanwhile, was undergoing rapid industrial and imperial expansion. Britain, France, and other powers were competing for trade routes, resources, and influence. Control of transportation corridors mattered as much as control of land. Egypt sat at the center of these ambitions. In 1863, Ismail Pasha became Khedive of Egypt. He inherited a country that was stable, growing, and strategically vital. Ismail believed Egypt could become a modern European-style state. He famously declared that Egypt was no longer part of Africa, but part of Europe. His goal was not only independence from Ottoman oversight, but international recognition as a modern power. To achieve this, Ismail launched an aggressive modernization program, expanded Egypt's railway system, built roads and bridges, modernized the army, constructed schools, and redesigned Cairo along European lines. He sponsored opera houses, palaces, and public buildings meant to showcase Egypt's transformation. These projects were intended to signal strength, legitimacy, and progress. The problem was cost. Egypt's economy was heavily dependent on agriculture, especially cotton. While cotton exports brought revenue, they could not support the scale of spending Ismail envisioned. Egypt did not have the industrial base or financial reserves to fund modernization internally. To bridge the gap, Ismail turned to European lenders. European banks were eager to lend. Egypt was seen as a valuable borrower, strategically important, politically ambitious, and backed by a government willing to pay high interest. Loans flowed in from British and French financiers. The terms, however, were harsh. Interest rates were high. Fees were extensive. Repayment schedules were short. At first, the loans appeared manageable. New projects created visible growth. Revenue increased temporarily, especially during the American Civil War, when Egyptian cotton replaced cotton exports from the United States. This windfall masked deeper structural problems. Spending continued to rise faster than income. Debt accumulated faster than it could be repaid. By the early 1870s, Egypt was trapped in a cycle of borrowing. New loans were taken out to pay old ones. Each agreement came with stricter conditions. Creditors demanded guarantees often tied to specific revenue streams like customs duties or tax income. The Egyptian government gradually lost control over how its money was allocated. The most ambitious and consequential project of this period was the Suez Canal. The canal was designed to connect the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, dramatically shortening the sea route between Europe and Asia. Its construction had begun earlier under French leadership, but Ismail expanded Egypt's financial involvement. The canal promised immense long-term value, but its construction was costly and plagued by overruns. Forced labor systems collapsed. Compensation payments mounted. Egypt's financial exposure deepened. When the canal opened in 1869, it was celebrated as a global triumph. World leaders attended the opening ceremonies. Ships from across Europe passed through Egyptian waters. But financially, the canal did not immediately deliver the returns Egypt needed. Revenue grew slowly, while debt obligations remained immediate. By 1875, Egypt was effectively insolvent. Interest payments consumed the majority of state income. Creditors demanded action. Default loomed. Faced with this crisis, Ismail made one of the most consequential decisions in Egypt's modern history. He sold Egypt's shares in the Suez Canal Company. The buyer was the British government. Britain moved quickly and decisively. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli secured emergency financing and purchased Egypt's shares outright, without waiting for parliamentary approval. With this transaction, Britain gained substantial control over the canal, securing a vital route to India and the Far East. For Egypt, the sale provided short-term relief, but long-term vulnerability. The money was used to pay immediate debts, but it did not solve the underlying financial crisis. Worse, Egypt had now surrendered control over its most strategic asset. Soon after, Britain and France proposed a new solution: direct financial supervision. Under this arrangement, known as the dual control, British and French officials were placed in charge of Egypt's finances, oversaw tax collection, approved budgets, and ensured that debt repayments were prioritized above all else. Egyptian sovereignty was formally intact, but in practice, the most important decisions were no longer made by Egyptians. This system reflected a broader imperial logic. European powers increasingly viewed financial control as a legitimate form of influence. If a state could not manage its debts, intervention was justified in the name of stability and creditor protection. Egypt became a textbook case. The consequences inside Egypt were severe. Taxes increased sharply, particularly on rural farmers. Public spending on social services and development was cut. Economic hardships spread. Many Egyptians viewed the financial controllers as foreign rulers imposed without consent. Ismail himself resisted the arrangement, but his position was weak. European governments pressured the Ottoman Sultan to remove him. In 1879, Ismail was forced to abdicate. He left Egypt in disgrace, his modernization project in ruins. His successors inherited a country deeply constrained by foreign oversight. Discontent grew rapidly. In the army, Egyptian officers resented the preferential treatment given to Turkish and Circassian elites and the influence of foreign advisors. Among civilians, anger focused on rising taxes and declining living standards. Nationalist sentiment coalesced around demands for constitutional government and an end to foreign control. The most prominent figure to emerge from this unrest was Ahmed Urabi, an Egyptian army officer. Urabi became the face of a movement that called for reform, national dignity, and resistance to foreign domination. His message resonated widely. By 1881, unrest had escalated into open confrontation. Demonstrations, mutinies, and political instability alarmed European governments. Britain, in particular, feared that disorder might threaten the Suez Canal and disrupt imperial trade routes. British officials framed the crisis as a matter of international security. They argued that intervention was necessary to protect commerce, restore order, and safeguard foreign lives and property. This justification provided political cover for military action. In 1882, following violent clashes in Alexandria, Britain launched a naval bombardment of the city. British troops landed soon after and defeated Urabi's forces at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir. Cairo fell quickly. Urabi was arrested and exiled. Britain now occupied Egypt militarily. Officially, this occupation was temporary. Britain claimed it had no intention of annexing Egypt or dismantling Ottoman sovereignty. In practice, British officials took control of key institutions, including the army, the bureaucracy, and the financial system. The system of debt repayment continued, now enforced by military power. Egypt paid for its own occupation. Tax revenue funded the administration that ruled it. Debt repayments flowed steadily to European creditors. British officials justified their presence by pointing to improved efficiency and financial discipline. But these reforms served imperial interests first. If this history is useful so far, this is a good moment to like the video or subscribe. These stories only reach wider audiences with your support. The British occupation of Egypt would last until the mid-20th century. Over time, Britain consolidated its influence, turning Egypt into a cornerstone of its Middle Eastern empire. The canal became one of the most heavily guarded and strategically important routes in the world. Egypt's political development was shaped around British priorities. The core lesson of Egypt's experience lies in the relationship between debt and sovereignty. Egypt was not conquered because it was militarily weak. It was constrained because financial obligations transferred power outward. Each loan reduced flexibility. Each concession narrowed options. By the time resistance emerged, the structure of control was already in place. The turning point was not the British invasion in 1882. It was the moment Egypt lost control of its finances. Military occupation formalized a reality that debt had already created. This pattern would repeat elsewhere in the world. Financial dependency became a tool of influence. Economic oversight became a pretext for political intervention. Egypt's case demonstrated that sovereignty could be eroded gradually. Without formal conquest, through systems that prioritized creditor interests over national autonomy, by the time Egypt regained full control of its affairs in the 20th century, the costs were immense. Decades of development had been shaped by external priorities. Political institutions had been weakened. Economic structures had been designed to serve foreign needs. Egypt's story is not simply one of mismanagement or ambition gone wrong. It is a reminder that power operates through systems as much as through force. Decisions made under financial pressure can carry consequences far beyond their immediate context. If you have thoughts on how this history connects to the modern world, leave a comment. These discussions matter. The debt deal that turned Egypt into a British colony was not a single agreement, but a chain of decisions driven by ambition, constraint, and global power dynamics. It shows how control can be transferred quietly, legally, and incrementally, until independence exists only in name. In the end, Egypt did not lose its sovereignty on a battlefield. It lost it through contracts, oversight committees, and repayment schedules. And by the time the soldiers arrived, the outcome had already been decided.